Right now, somewhere in Gordonville, Pennsylvania, an old Amish carpenter named Aaron is in his workshop. The lights are on. His chest freezer is humming. His drill press is ready for tomorrow morning. And not a single wire runs from his building to a utility pole. He has never, not once in over 50 years, opened a monthly electric bill. Not because he lives by candlelight. Not because he gave up modern comforts. But because he figured out something the power companies have spent decades making sure you never would. And here's the part that's going to make your stomach drop. The system that has kept his workshop running for half a century cost him about $300. Stay with me. Because by the time this video is over, you are going to understand exactly why you never heard about this, who benefits from your silence, and precisely how to start doing what Aaron has done. Even if you live in a regular house in a regular suburb and have never touched a wire in your life. Let's start with something most people assume is just a given. You use electricity, you pay for electricity. Every month, without fail, a bill shows up, you pay it. You don't think too hard about where it came from or why it costs what it costs, because what else are you going to do? Call and complain? Switch to a different company? In most parts of this country, there is no different company. There is one grid, one provider, one relationship, and you did not choose it. You were born into it. Now picture something different. Picture a single solar panel leaning against the south-facing wall of a barn. Nothing fancy, no roof installation, no contractor, no permit application, sitting in a municipal office somewhere. Just a panel tilted toward the sun and a battery the size of a small cooler sitting beneath a workbench, quietly soaking up everything that panel makes during the daylight hours. Then, when the sun goes down, that battery gives it all back, keeping a freezer cold, keeping lights on, keeping a power tool ready for the next morning. That is the entire system. And it has been working in Amish and Mennonite communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana for decades, not as some primitive workaround. As a deliberate, elegant solution that these communities understood long before the rest of the country started hanging $20,000 panels on their rooftops. Here is what nobody in the solar industry will tell you in their glossy brochures and their zero-down financing pitches. You do not need to power your entire house to change your life. You need to power one thing at a time. One appliance, one task, one circuit. The Amish call it the direct task approach. And it is so simple that once you see it, you will be genuinely angry that no one explained it to you sooner. Let's talk about the numbers, because this is where the story gets almost uncomfortable to hear. A single 100-watt solar panel, the kind you can order from any rural supply store or farm co-op, runs about $75. A 100-amp lithium iron phosphate battery, the same chemistry trusted by the most demanding off-grid systems in the world, costs around $150. A 30-amp charge controller, which is the small device that protects your battery from overcharging and prevents it from draining too far, costs about $25. A 400-watt pure sine wave inverter, which converts the battery's stored power into normal household current that any appliance can use, costs around $40. Add it all up. Throw in a few feet of wire, a fuse, and you absolutely need the fuse, which we will come back to. And you are looking at roughly $300 all in. $300. That is 1% of what most solar installers quote for a rooftop system. And unlike a rooftop system, this $300 setup has no monthly payment, no 25-year loan, no contract with anyone, and it will not shut itself off during a blackout the way grid-tied systems are legally required to do. That last point deserves a moment because it genuinely stuns most people when they hear it. Many of the expensive solar systems that homeowners are paying tens of thousands of dollars for are designed to go completely dark the moment the grid goes down. There is a legitimate reason for this. It prevents power from accidentally feeding back into lines that utility workers believe are dead. But the result is that on the day of a major storm, when the whole neighborhood is out of power, the person with the $30,000 rooftop installation is sitting in the dark right alongside everyone else. Aaron's shop, meanwhile, keeps right on running. His freezer never skips a beat because he is not tied to the grid at all. When the grid fails, there's nothing to fail him. The sun comes up the next morning the same as it always does. Now, the question that always comes up at this point is, why don't more people know about this? And the answer reaches back further than most people expect. In 1978, the United States federal government passed something called the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act. On paper, it was designed to encourage small-scale renewable energy. In practice, the rules that developed around it, and the industry that grew up inside those rules, painted a very specific picture of what a legitimate solar installation was supposed to look like. Grid-tied, permitted, inspected, sold by a licensed contractor, financed over 2 decades. A simple $300 circuit running a chest freezer off its own dedicated battery never fit that picture. So it never appeared in the advertisements, never showed up in the consumer guides, never got featured in the home improvement magazines. Not because it was illegal, but because there was no money in it for anyone except the person who owned the house. Think about that. The knowledge existed. The technology worked. The costs were reachable for almost any household in America. And it was simply never amplified, never marketed, never placed where ordinary people could find it. Because the people who control what gets amplified and marketed had nothing to gain from your independence. The Amish were not troubled by any of this. Their whole way of life is built around a single principle that sounds almost too simple until you really sit with it. Cut out the middleman and do the thing yourself. And the electrical grid, when you strip away the familiar logos and the cheerful customer service numbers and look at it honestly, is the biggest middleman ever built. Between the energy that exists in the natural world and the light in your kitchen sits an enormous apparatus. Power plants, transmission lines, transformers, substations, meters, billing departments, rate commissions, fuel surcharge formulators, and every single piece of that apparatus takes a cut. You're not just paying for electricity. You're paying for the system that keeps you dependent on paying for electricity. A solar panel sitting 12 feet from the freezer it powers eliminates all of that in one move. No apparatus, no middleman, no cut taken. The sun makes the power. The battery stores it. The freezer uses it. That is the complete transaction, and the entire economic logic of the utility industry vanishes. Here is how the system actually works, because once you understand the flow, the mystery evaporates completely. The panel sits outside, facing south, tilted at roughly the angle of your latitude. In the mid-Atlantic states, that's around 40 degrees, not much different from how a lawn chair leans back. Whenever sunlight hits the panel, it produces direct current electricity. That current travels through insulated wires to the charge controller, which is the quiet, modest genius of the whole setup. The charge controller watches the battery continuously. It manages how fast the battery charges, prevents it from overloading, and cuts off the charge before the battery is pushed past its limits. Without this little device, a battery would swell, overheat, and fail within weeks. With it, a quality battery lasts 15 to 20 years. From the controller, the current flows into the battery. And this is where things got genuinely transformative around 2015 when lithium iron phosphate batteries, the chemistry the industry abbreviates as LiFePO4, became affordable for everyday consumers. Before that, off-grid systems relied on lead-acid batteries, the same basic chemistry under your car's hood. They worked, but they were demanding. They wore out in 3 to 5 years. They weighed 60 pounds or more. They had to be kept upright and ventilated because they could off-gas under heavy charge and leak acid. They hated being drained below half capacity. LiFePO4 batteries changed every single one of those problems. They last 3 to 4 times as long. They weigh a fraction as much. They don't leak, don't off-gas, and can be discharged much deeper without damage. That one shift in chemistry is what converted the simple Amish solar circuit from a clever trick requiring constant attention into something you can set up, walk away from, and largely forget about. From the battery, the current flows into the inverter, which does one job. It converts the battery's 12-volt direct current into the same 120-volt alternating current that comes out of every outlet in your house. You plug your appliance into the inverter exactly the way you'd plug it into a wall socket. That's the complete system. Panel, charge controller, battery, inverter, appliance. 5 components. One afternoon to put together. About $300. Now, and this matters, so pay attention. There's a safety conversation that has to happen here, because the people who share this kind of information sometimes gloss right over it, and that is genuinely dangerous. The low voltage side of the system, the panel and the battery operating at 12 or 24 volts, is far more forgiving than household wiring. But a battery of this size can push an enormous amount of current if you accidentally create a short circuit. We are talking about enough amperage to melt metal, cause burns, or start a fire. That is why every single one of these systems needs a properly sized inline fuse placed on the battery, right where the manual specifies. The fuse is not optional. It is not something you skip to save $4. It is the one component standing between a small mistake and a serious catastrophe. Put the fuses in every time, no exceptions. The output side of the inverter, the 120-volt side, is real household current and should be treated with the exact same respect you give any wall outlet, because it is the same thing. If you are simply plugging an appliance into the inverter with its normal cord, the way you'd plug it into any kitchen outlet, you are fine. That is no more dangerous than what you already do every day. But if you ever want to wire an inverter into your home's actual circuit panel, you have crossed into territory that requires a licensed electrician, proper permits, and a correctly installed transfer switch to prevent backfeeding power onto the grid. That work exists. It is legitimate. But it is a different conversation from the simple task-dedicated circuit the Amish pioneered, and it should only be done by someone qualified to do it. The Amish kept it simple on purpose. One appliance, one cord, one inverter. And keeping it that simple is what keeps it safe. So where do you start? Let's make this concrete. Think about your chest freezer. If you have one, in the basement, the garage, the back porch, It is probably one of the single largest consumers of electricity in your home because it runs 24 hours a day, every single day of the year, whether you opened it that morning or not. A modern chest freezer uses roughly 200 kilowatt hours per year. Depending on your utility rate and your location, that's somewhere between $60 and $120 of your annual bill, quietly draining away from a box you mostly ignore. Now imagine this instead. A single 100-watt panel mounted on the south-facing exterior wall of your garage. Not on the roof, not bolted into anything permanent, just leaned and secured against the wall where it catches sun for most of the day. A battery on the floor inside, properly fused, connected through a charge controller to that panel. An inverter wired to the battery. You unplug the freezer from the wall outlet and plug it into the inverter. That is the entire change. Nothing else in your house is touched. No electrician called, no permit pulled. You simply moved one cord from one outlet to another outlet, one that happens to be powered by the sun. And because the battery stores enough charge during daylight hours to carry the freezer through the night, it runs continuously, cold and steady, the same as it always has. Except now it is costing you nothing. Within a year, the system has paid for itself entirely. The freezer that used to cost you $100 a year now costs you $0, and you still have the system. The same battery, the same panel, still working, still free. Then you do it again. The workshop lights, the well pump, the fan in the bedroom during summer, one circuit at a time, each one a complete little system of its own, independent, resilient, and permanent. This is exactly what Aaron did. Not in one weekend, not in one dramatic overhaul, but over decades, adding one circuit when a need arose and another when the next need came. None of them cost him more than a few $100s. All of them together have kept him free from the utility grid for his entire adult working life. There's a deeper layer to this that barely anyone outside certain Amish and Old Order Mennonite communities has ever heard about, and this is the part that has been quietly circulating in handwritten and photocopied form through workshops in Holmes County, Ohio, and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Since the early 1980s, never copyrighted, never commercially printed, never marketed, just passed from hand to hand among the men who built and maintained these systems and wanted to share what they were learning. The technique is called the parallel chain. Instead of one large centralized battery system, you build 5 or 6 small dedicated circuits, each running its own appliance, each a complete loop of its own. The freezer has its circuit, the well pump has its circuit, the shop lights have theirs. Then, at the heart of the setup, you connect the batteries together through a single switch and a properly fused wire. Most of the time, that switch stays open. Each circuit runs completely independently, as if the others don't exist. But when one battery runs low, during a stretch of cloudy days when the panel isn't keeping up with demand, you close the switch for a few hours. The batteries equalize. The low one borrows from the ones that are full. Then you open the switch again and everything returns to independence. The cost of that switch and the extra wire and fuses is somewhere around $30. $30, and your entire collection of small circuits gains the ability to support each other through difficult stretches. Think about what that solves. A week of overcast skies in January, the scenario that most people worry about with any solar setup, stops being a crisis and becomes a minor inconvenience. The strong circuits quietly hold up the weak ones, and when the sun returns, everything tops off and the debt is repaid without anyone lifting a finger. One man in the Mount Hope, Ohio area who asked that his name not be used in full has been running a 5-circuit parallel chain for 15 years. Total maintenance in that time. One charge controller that failed and was replaced for $25. That's it. 15 years of continuous operation powering an entire working shop for a single $25 replacement part. This knowledge came from somewhere older. The trail runs back to the early 1900s, to the era before rural electrification, when companies like Delco Light sold small generator and battery systems to the farms that the grid had not yet reached. The standard Delco setup used a bank of lead acid cells, a small gasoline engine to charge them, and a panel to run lights and basic appliances. Thousands of farms across rural America ran on systems like this through the 20s and 30s. When the rural electrification programs of the late 30s and 40s finally brought the grid to most of those farms, the Delco systems became obsolete almost overnight. The companies shut down their battery divisions. The equipment went to auction. The Amish bought it. Quietly, without announcement, they showed up at the estate sales and the liquidation auctions and carried home the surplus glass jar cells and the controllers and the wiring at pennies on the dollar. And they kept the knowledge alive, the knowledge of how to capture, store, and use energy independently, while the rest of the country forgot that any alternative to the grid had ever existed. The grid itself, remember, was sold to the American public as pure progress, convenience, modernity, and in many ways it was. But it also accomplished something else, something that was perhaps not advertised quite as prominently. It made every American household permanently dependent on a monthly payment to a company they did not choose and could not leave. That dependency was baked in so early and so completely that within a generation, most people simply could not imagine any other arrangement. The Amish could imagine it, because they had never stopped living it. Here at Secret Vault, we spend a lot of time digging into exactly this kind of buried knowledge, the practical, useful, genuinely empowering information that got pushed to the margins, not because it didn't work, but because it didn't generate revenue for the right people. And few examples illustrate that pattern as clearly as this one. There is a harness maker in Lancaster County, now in his late 60s, who has been off the grid his entire adult life. When he was a newly married young man in 1978, a utility company representative came out to his property and offered him a hookup. Free installation, 2 years of discounted rates. All he had to do was sign a 20-year contract. He showed the man his battery bank and his hand pump and declined. The representative told him, with some amusement, that every Amish farm in the county would be on the grid within 10 years because the young people wouldn't tolerate the old ways. That was nearly 50 years ago. The harness maker's farm is still off the grid. His sons are off the grid. His grandchildren are growing up off the grid. The utility company that sent that representative has since been bought, sold, merged, and reorganized more times than he can count. He said something once that has stayed with me. The hardest part of maintaining a system after all these years is remembering that it isn't hard. He said that people like us, people who grew up with the grid, have been conditioned to believe that anything involving electricity is inherently dangerous and complicated and requires professional intervention. And he acknowledged that is absolutely true. Of household wiring and the grid itself, which operates at voltages that genuinely can kill you. But the 12-volt heart of his own system, he said, is gentle enough to learn one step at a time, with the manual open on the bench and the fuses properly in place. That is the distinction worth holding on to. The grid is complicated. It is also genuinely dangerous. The simple, self-contained, task-dedicated circuit is neither. It is something a careful, patient person can understand and build in an afternoon. Let's step back from the technical details for a moment and look at the larger picture. Because the real story here isn't about watts and amp hours. The real story is about time, your labor. When you receive a utility bill, what you're actually holding is a document that converts your hours, the finite, irreplaceable hours of your one life, into a payment that goes to a company that did nothing to earn it except exist between you and the energy that was, in some meaningful sense, always available to you directly. Think about what those payments add up to over a working lifetime. At the average American electric bill, the total over 40 years is well over $100,000. That is a down payment on a house. That is college for a child. That is the difference between having something to leave behind and leaving nothing at all. And it gets extracted from you so gradually, kilowatt by kilowatt, month by month, that most people stopped noticing it happen decades ago. Because somewhere along the way, a story was told and widely believed that electricity comes from the wall comes from the company, and the company is a permanent, inevitable feature of reality, as fixed as gravity and as unchallengeable as the weather. That story is not true. It has never been true. Aaron's workshop has been proving it false for 50 years. The good news, the genuinely exciting news, is that the entry point into this different arrangement is $300 and one free afternoon. You do not need to leave the grid entirely. You do not need to make any dramatic changes to your house or your life. You start with one appliance, the one that bothers you most, the one that runs constantly and silently costs you money every single day. You build one circuit, you watch what happens to your bill. And then you decide what comes next. The knowledge was never gone. It was just kept quiet by people whose income depended on your not having it. And here at Secret Vault, that is exactly the kind of knowledge we are committed to recovering. One panel, one battery, one appliance, one afternoon, $300. Aaron has been doing it for 50 years. The only difference between you and him is that you're starting today. Tell us in the comments which appliance you're going to take off the grid first. The freezer, the well pump, the workshop lights. Post it, because the person who reads your comment might be the person who finally decides to begin. And subscribe, because we are just getting started. There's an entire library of this kind of knowledge, practical, proven, deliberately buried, and we are working through it piece by piece. The people who kept it from you had 50 years. You have right now. Use it well. Use it safely.